You're listening to CRV's Better Herd podcast, brought to you in partnership with the New Zealand dairy exporter. Join us as we talk to CRV experts, industry leaders and farmers about hot topics and issues affecting herd improvement in New Zealand's dairy industry today.
Mastitis is a costly animal health condition managed by New Zealand dairy farmers. In addition to being costly, treatment of mastitis also means the use of antibiotics. With the increased pressure to reduce antibiotic use on farms, it is increasingly important to have healthier herds with a lower incidence of mastitis. To discuss this important topic, we have invited Jane Lacy-Hulbert, Senior Scientist from DairyNZ, and Aaron Parker, Breeding Program Manager at CRV. Welcome.
Thank you.
Dr. Jane Lacy-Hulbert is a Senior Scientist at DairyNZ with over 25 years' experience studying environmental mastitis and milk quality. Between 2015 and 2019, she led a research project focused on helping farmers and vets adjust to new ways of using antibiotics, in particular dry cow antibiotics. Since 2018, she has led a team of 5 developers and specialists who have a keen interest in supporting farmers and their off-farm advisors to better manage pasture, feed and animals. As part of this role, she has oversight for well-recognised training products such as InCalf, Smart Sam, Healthy Hoof and Feed Right. So Jane, I'll begin with you. Why do we need to reduce our use of antibiotics?
The main reason is because we are seeing more and more situations where bacteria are developing antimicrobial resistance. So resistance against some of the antibiotics that we use already. And it's particularly an issue in human health. And it's a normal phenomenon because at the end of the day, all of the antibiotics that we have often come from bacteria as they fight each other for survival. But our problem is that we cannot capitalize on those products quick enough to keep up with the rate at which they develop antibiotic resistance. So it really comes down to us and how we use the existing products we have in a wise and prudent way.
So what sort of alternatives are there for farmers to use?
Right across the world, farmers are making changes to the way they use antibiotic products. In dairy, we're no different, and we're looking at ways to try and reduce the amount of antibiotics, particularly at drying off. This is a time when we've usually used dry cow products to prevent infections, and we're trying to pull back from that position and use non-antibiotic alternatives, such as the internal teat sealants, to use those to prevent new infections.
And so how are we helping our farmers and vets to do these things differently?
So some of the key ways, we've been carrying out some research over the last 3 or 4 years to give vets more confidence about using some of the internal teat sealants, to give them more information on cows to select for these products and which cows to reserve the dry cow therapy for. We've also been really providing more information about how to actually use hygienic technique around the time of actually using the products, and this reduces risks that could happen at that time of the season.
So you talk about preventing infections, and I'm assuming that means keeping somatic cell counts down. What steps can a farmer take to improve, better manage, or even prevent mastitis?
So key times at drying off would be have good hygienic technique around the actual administration process. So the way we actually get these products into the cows' teats. We have the DairyNZ Healthy Udder resource is there for helping farm teams to do a good job at drying off. But there's other things that we need to be doing all the way through lactation that help reduce mastitis. So the classic ones of teat spraying, making sure that we're getting good coverage of teat spray onto cows' teats. Also making sure that during the milking time we're reducing down the likelihood of teat damage. So we're looking after the teats and we're not over milking. All of these things help to reduce down mastitis during the lactation period, during the milking time. So those are sort of the key things to be doing. We can also look at somatic cell counts, looking at the herd testing. We're using those to choose the right cows that receive the dry cow antibiotics. And also making good, wise culling decisions. That's part of mastitis prevention, is actually to get rid of some of the cows with high somatic cell counts or have got long-term infections, and to get those out of the herd as well. So those are some of the sort of key things for preventing mastitis. So some of the benefits of having a good, healthy udder. There's a lot of on-farm benefits of, at the end of the day, more milk in the vat, better animal health. No one likes to see cows in pain, and mastitis is a painful disease. It can also lead to better fertility. We actually see an impact on, if we can prevent mastitis during that sort of mating period, we certainly see impacts on reproduction. It also means that milking is a much less hassle. The shorter milkings, there's less cows to be treated and dealt with at the end of the milking. And we certainly have happier milking teams if they don't have to deal with a lot of mastitis cows.
So how can genetics help to improve udder health? And with that, less antibiotic use?
That's a really good and important question. Unlike many of the other health traits that we have, we can reduce somatic cells by using the genetic measures we have. So selection will absolutely help with the reducing the incidence of mastitis. It's a slow process, but it is also permanent. So for every generation you make improvement, it's going to stay in the population. So you don't lose any of the gains you make. So just a little bit of background. What we're looking at here, they've got clinical mastitis, and that's the visible form of mastitis. And unfortunately, we lack a lot of records. We have some records on clinical mastitis, but we don't have a lot of records. And mainly is because farmers do record it, but they don't record it in places where we can get access to it in the national evaluation system. So we're lacking a little bit of information in there. But it does help for us within our herd testing. We have large amounts of records we can look at. And we can look at the herd testing information, and when we see an increase in somatic cells, that can give us an indication of high subclinical mastitis. And it is through these measures we're able to create breeding values and tools for farmers to use to reduce somatic cells in their herds. Somatic cells is lowly heritable. It's only about 15% heritable, but that's still high enough to make some really good progress. And just like bulk milk, you want to see lower somatic cells. The breeding value is the same. You want a negative breeding value to reduce the number of somatics you have in your bull. So a negative value in this case is actually desirable. So if let's make an assumption that you have 150,000 somatic cells and you have a breeding value of around -1, this roughly equivalates to 75,000 somatic cell count. So on average, that's a level of 75,000, which is a massive improvement. The other big thing that is used genetically now is you can use traits as a single trait selection, and somatic cells is a really good trait. You can use that for a single trait, but it's also included in BW. And by using it in the index means that every farmer who's selecting for index, the overall value, is able to reduce their somatic cells by using the National Breeding Objective. And that's been in there since 2004 from memory. And since that date, we've seen somatic cells improve just by seeing it sitting in the index. So if you want to use to improve your somatic cells, using the index is generally a nice way of moving forward.
Are there any other traits that influence cell count?
Yeah, like anything in breeding, there's a lot of these traits are actually highly related. As Jane mentioned, there's a really strong link between fertility and high cell count. Healthy cows generally have less issues and they produce more and get in calf. A high somatic cell count, therefore, is a really good indicator of other health-related issues that a cow may have. So from a farming point of view, and from a breeding program point of view, when we're looking at elite cows, we use milking speed as an indicator that is related to somatic cells and mastitis. Farmers do like cows that have fast milking and they can move them out of the shed really quickly. We do know that high milking speed has a negative correlation to somatic cells. Also, the udder traits. So we look closely in the breeding program at a cow's udder, and that's not just for cows to look pretty. We want them to last longer in herds. Obviously, if it's a good udder, the farmer's going to keep them because it's easier to milk them, get the cups on, etc. But it can also be related to somatic cells. So things like teat placement can affect how somatic cells can affect an animal. Also, if you can imagine if an udder blows out and that udder's in the mud and the ground banging on the legs, that can potentially cause a higher somatic cell.
And tell me, Aaron, what is CRV doing to improve udder health?
Yeah, this has been a really, really big program for us. A number of years ago, one of our colleagues locked us in a room and said, in our program, we have some really good bulls, but they do have high somatic cells, or higher than we would have liked. What can we do to improve that? So we put a targeted breeding program in place, and that's what a farmer can do as well. You can use that breeding value to target the high somatic cell cows and use low somatic cell bulls to improve. We are also really lucky to have the research department in Holland, and we have all the records from Holland. So we're able to look at a lot more subclinical and clinical data to support the program here in New Zealand to develop these breeding tools for farmers to reduce their somatic tails through our bull team. We're also including it in our own internal index, and that helps us to select better bulls so farmers have the access to those to use. With our project test farmers, we're using MyHerd, our animal recording software, and we're hoping to pick up more information and more clinical and subclinical information from those high recording herds to get better and more accurate information. That then filters through our program and helps us develop new indexes that we can include, like our Better Life Health and Efficiency indexes, and add them to give farmers tools to help them continue to reduce mastitis and somatic cells.
So I'd like to thank you both for being with me today to continue the discussion on reducing the use of antibiotics in our industry. This is a global problem facing our farming community, and it's up to us to play our part. And that means using whatever tools are available to us. Short-term management practices plus breeding for an animal that stands up to modern farming practices. If you are currently experiencing a problem with mastitis on your farm, your first point of contact should always be your vet. You can, of course, check out the DairyNZ website for further information.
Thanks for listening to CRV's Better Heard podcast. Read more about today's topic and our panel guests by visiting crvforall.co.nz. That's crv4all.co.nz. Or follow us on social media.